I never thought 3 little words would be the end of a 15-year marriage. But when my wife stood in our living room screaming that I had to apologize to her entitled 30-year-old son for telling him he couldn't live in our house rent-free anymore, or she would file for divorce, I realized the woman I loved had become a stranger. Was I wrong for calling her bluff and ending it all right then and there? Or would you have stood your ground against a partner who puts their grown child's laziness above your own happiness and the sanctity of your home? I need you to hear how this started, because the betrayal didn't just happen in that moment. It had been brewing for years, hidden under the surface of every temporary favor and every "he just needs a little help" excuse. My wife, Sarah, had fed me since the day her son Marcus decided that the real world was just too hard for him to handle. To understand how we got to that explosive night, you have to understand the dynamic of our family from the very beginning. I met Sarah when Marcus was 15, a moody teenager who was already showing signs of the entitlement that would eventually destroy us. I did everything a stepfather was supposed to do. I attended every game, helped with every homework assignment, and even helped him buy his first car with money I had saved from my own overtime hours. I treated him like he was my own flesh and blood, but Sarah always kept a wall between us. Whenever I tried to implement any kind of discipline or structure, she would swoop in and tell me that I wasn't his real father and that I didn't understand the bond they shared. I let it slide because I loved her, and I thought that as Marcus grew up, he would eventually find his footing and we could be a normal family. I was wrong. By the time Marcus hit 25, he had already dropped out of 3 different community colleges and been fired from more entry-level jobs than I can count on both hands. Each time, he would slink back to our house, and Sarah would welcome him with open arms, cooking his favorite meals and washing his laundry while he sat in the basement playing video games until 4 in the morning. I tried to talk to her about it, explaining that she was enabling him, but she would just start crying and tell me that I was being heartless. The tension grew until it felt like a permanent third wheel in our marriage. We couldn't go on a vacation without Marcus calling with an emergency that required Sarah to send him money. We couldn't have a quiet dinner without the conversation revolving around his latest drama. It felt like I was living in a home that I paid for, but I had no say in the rules. Every time I brought up a budget, Sarah would hide receipts. Every time I suggested Marcus get a therapist or a career coach, she accused me of calling her son broken. It was an exhausting cycle of gaslighting. I remember one specific instance about 2 years ago when I found out Marcus had used my credit card information, which he'd swiped from my wallet while I was in the shower, to buy nearly $2,000 worth of digital assets for some online game. I was livid. I told Sarah we needed to file a police report to teach him a lesson, but she literally got on her knees and begged me not to, saying it would ruin his future. What future? The one where he steals from the people who feed him. I relented, but only on the condition that he work off the debt by doing yard work and repairs around the house. Do you think he did a single hour of work? No. Sarah ended up doing the yard work herself while I was at the office so it would look like he was helping, just to keep me from getting angry. When I caught her doing it, she just said, "I'm just trying to keep the peace. Why do you have to be so difficult?" That's when I realized that the peace she wanted was actually my silence. She didn't want a healthy son. She wanted a comfortable secret. Marcus grew even more emboldened, knowing his mother was his ultimate shield. He started talking back to me, mocking my career, and even inviting people over at all hours of the night without asking. The house I once considered my sanctuary became a place of dread. I found myself staying late at the office just to avoid the heavy atmosphere of resentment waiting for me at home. I started noticing that my own belongings were disappearing, tools from the garage, expensive watches I'd received as gifts, and even rare coins I'd collected since I was a boy. When I brought it up, Marcus would just shrug and say he didn't know what I was talking about, and Sarah would suggest I was getting older and losing track of things. The gaslighting was so extreme that I actually started to doubt my own memory until I found a pawn shop receipt in the trash can. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the total lack of respect for my personhood. I was nothing more than a resource to be harvested. Every conversation we had was a minefield. If I mentioned the light bill being $300 higher than usual because Marcus left the air conditioning on with the windows open, Sarah would claim I was nickel-and-diming her son. If I complained about the smell of old gym clothes and stale pizza that now permeated the downstairs, I was obsessive. I felt like a prisoner in a house I was paying the mortgage on. I began to withdraw, keeping my door locked and my finances separate where I could, but the damage was already deep. I watched as Sarah's health began to decline from the stress of maintaining the lie. She was constantly exhausted, working extra shifts just to give him spending money that he would blow in a single weekend. It was a tragedy of her own making, but she refused to see it. She viewed her enabling as a form of noble sacrifice, when in reality, it was a slow-motion execution of our relationship. I remember one night, I sat Marcus down and tried one last time to reach him as a man. I told him that I loved his mother and that seeing her work herself into the ground for him was killing me. I offered to pay for a trade school if he would just commit to it. He looked me in the eye, took a long drag of his vape, and told me that he didn't have to do anything because his mother had already promised him that the house would be his when I died. That was the chilling reality I was living in. He wasn't waiting for a life to start. He was waiting for mine to end. Things reached a breaking point 6 months ago when Marcus lost his latest job at a warehouse because he simply decided he didn't want to wake up for the morning shift. He moved back into our spare bedroom for a few weeks, but weeks turned into months, and he made zero effort to find new work. He stopped cleaning up after himself, leaving half-eaten food to rot in the living room and expecting us to pay for his phone bill and car insurance. I told Sarah that enough was enough. He needed to pay a small amount of rent to learn responsibility, or he had to leave. Sarah agreed to my face, but behind my back she was giving him the money to pay me, using our joint savings account to cover his tracks. When I found out, I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I confronted them both during dinner, and Marcus had the audacity to laugh and tell me that I was just the wallet, and that his mom would always choose him. Sarah didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. She just told Marcus to go to his room and then turned on me, blaming my hostility for his lack of progress. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 15 years and saw someone I didn't recognize. She was willing to bankrupt our future and destroy our retirement savings just to keep her son in a perpetual state of childhood. I started keeping a log of all the money that was disappearing from our accounts. It was staggering. Thousands of dollars diverted to Marcus's car repairs, Marcus's dental bill, and Marcus's emergency. It was a slow bleed that was destined to kill our marriage. I began to realize that Sarah was addicted to his dependency. As long as he was a failure, she could be the savior. It was a parasitic loop that had no room for a husband. I spent my nights in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the breaking point would come. I had tried everything. Therapy, ultimatums, kindness, and coldness. Nothing worked because the foundation was rotten. Sarah had built our marriage on the condition that her son was the sun, and I was merely a planet revolving around his needs. The final week before the incident was a blur of silence and simmering rage. I found out that Marcus had invited a group of investors over to discuss a crypto scam, and they had been using my home office as their headquarters while I was at work. They had spilled coffee on my laptop and used my legal pads to map out their fraud. When I found them there, I didn't even say a word. I just walked out, went to the bank, and moved my paycheck to an account only I could access. That was the first step in my exit strategy, though I didn't know it yet. I was still hopping for a miracle, still hoping Sarah would wake up and realize that she was losing a partner who would have walked through fire for her. But the fire was already here, and she was the one holding the match. I started thinking about the years I'd lost, the hobbies I'd given up because we couldn't afford them, the stress-induced gray hair that seemed to appear overnight, and the way my own family had stopped visiting because they couldn't stand the way Marcus spoke to me. I realized that by staying, I wasn't being strong or loyal. I was being a doormat. I was facilitating my own destruction. I started making a list in my head of everything I wanted to do once I was free. I wanted to wake up in a house that didn't smell like gym socks. I wanted to go to the grocery store and buy things I actually liked, rather than things Marcus would scavenge in the middle of the night. I wanted to have a conversation that didn't end in a fight about a 30-year-old man's potential. The more I thought about it, the more the fear of leaving was replaced by a desperate, clawing hunger for freedom. I spent my lunch breaks at work looking at small apartments in the city, places with floor-to-ceiling windows and no guest rooms. I started quietly moving small, personal items, my grandfather's watch, my birth certificate, my college degree, to a storage unit. Every trip to that storage unit felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my soul. Sarah didn't even notice. She was too busy helping Marcus fill out an application for a creative consultant position that he was never going to get. She was so wrapped up in her fantasy world that she didn't see me slipping away right in front of her. On the night of the final confrontation, the air in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. I had come home from an exhausting 10-hour shift to find the house a total wreck. Marcus had invited some friends over while we were supposed to be having a family night. They had tracked mud through the house. There were empty beer bottles on the kitchen counter that I had paid for, and they were blasting music so loud the neighbors had already texted me to complain. When I walked in and told his friends to leave, Marcus stepped up to me, chest puffed out, and told me to screw off. He said that if I didn't like how he ran things, I could be the one to leave because his mom told him this was his house as much as mine. I lost it. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at him with a coldness I had never felt before and told him he had 24 hours to pack his bags or I was changing the locks and calling the sheriff to trespass him. Sarah came running down the stairs, having heard the commotion, and instead of being horrified by her son's blatant disrespect and the state of our home, she was furious with me. She told me I was a monster for homeless shamming her son and demanded that I apologize to him immediately for threatening him in his own home. She stood there, red-faced and shaking, and delivered the ultimatum that she thought would finally break me and force me back into my role as the silent provider. She looked me dead in the eyes and screamed, "Apologize to my stepson right now, or I am filing for divorce. I mean it, choose him or me." So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice between my self-respect and a marriage that had clearly become a one-way street. Before I tell you the 3 words I said and the absolute chaos that followed when I started packing, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have sucked up your pride to save the marriage, or would you have walked away? I didn't even hesitate. I looked at the woman I had built a life with, the woman I had supported through every hardship, and I realized I didn't even know who she was anymore. I took a deep breath, looked her right in the eye and said those 3 words, "File the papers." The look of shock on her face was almost worth the 15 years of frustration. She thought she had all the power. She thought I was so terrified of being alone that I would accept any amount of abuse. Marcus, who had been smugly watching from the hallway, suddenly looked terrified when he realized the person who actually paid the mortgage was leaving. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked upstairs, grabbed 2 large suitcases, and started throwing my essentials inside. Sarah followed me, transitioning from anger to begging in a matter of seconds. She tried to tell me she didn't mean it, that she was just stressed, but I told her that you don't threaten to end a marriage over a lazy 30-year-old unless you've already checked out. I told her I was done being the backup character in her and Marcus's twisted codependency. As I walked out the door, Marcus tried to block my path, demanding to know how they were going to pay the bills. I just looked at him and said, "I guess you'd better find a job that starts before noon," and I walked out. I checked into a hotel and blocked both of their numbers for the first 48 hours. The peace was immediate. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands or excuses. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal filings and harsh realizations. Within 2 weeks, I had a lawyer who specializes in high-conflict divorces. Because I had been the one keeping track of the diverted funds and the loans to Marcus, I was able to prove that Sarah had been dissipating marital assets. The court was not kind to her. I found out later that Sarah had to put the house on the market within 2 months because she couldn't afford the taxes and the upkeep without my salary. It was a beautiful home, but she had turned it into a prison for me, and now it was a burden for her. Marcus had to move into a tiny studio apartment with 3 other guys, and from what I hear, he's actually working at a fast food joint because nobody else is there to bail him out. He tried to sue me for emotional distress, but the judge laughed it out of court. Sarah tried to call me a dozen times from different numbers, crying about how she made a mistake and how Marcus has finally learned his lesson. I haven't looked back. I realized that by leaving, I didn't just lose a wife, I gained a life. I lost the constant weight of resentment and the feeling of being a stranger in my own home. I am finally at peace in my new apartment, which is clean, quiet, and entirely mine. I've started traveling again, things I couldn't do because Marcus always needed that money. I went to Japan last month, a trip I'd planned for 10 years but Sarah always canceled. I spent my time exploring ancient temples and eating incredible food, all without a single phone call complaining about a broken car or a lost job. I've reconnected with friends I haven't seen in years because they were too loud or too judgmental for Marcus to be around. My life is full of light and laughter now, instead of the heavy, suffocating gloom of that house. I realized that Sarah didn't just choose her son, she chose a life of misery. She chose the constant anxiety of a failing adult over the stability of a loving partnership. That is her cross to carry. I've heard from mutual friends that she's aged 10 years in the last 6 months. She's working 2 jobs just to keep Marcus's head above water, and he's already been arrested for a minor shoplifting charge. The cycle continues, but I am no longer part of the wheel. I've even started dating again, meeting women who have their own lives and who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide for their deadbeat relatives. It's a strange feeling being appreciated, but I'm getting used to it. I wake up every morning and I feel lighter. I look at the 3 words I said that night as the most important words I've ever spoken. They were the key to my cage. I've started a garden on my balcony, a small thing, but it's something I can nurture that won't bite the hand that feeds it. I've learned that loyalty to a person who doesn't respect you is just a slow form of suicide. I am choosing me now and it feels incredible. It's a hard pill to swallow, realizing that you were being used, but the moment you stop allowing it, you find out who people really are. Sarah didn't want a partner. She wanted a provider for her and her son's lifestyle. She traded a devoted husband for the privilege of continuing to baby a man who will never grow up. That's a choice she has to live with now. I hope Marcus eventually figures it out, but it's no longer my problem to solve. I learned that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you certainly shouldn't let them drown you in the process. My life is mine again, and that is worth more than any house or any 15-year mistake. I finally feel like the man I was before I met her, confident, capable, and free. Like this video if you think I made the right choice by standing up for my dignity, and subscribe for more stories where people finally break the chains of toxic relationships. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Would you have handled the ultimatum differently, or was "file the papers" the only logical response? I'll see you all in the next story.